Hi, I'm Delphine. My family told me not to show up for Christmas. They said I'd ruin the vibe. My sister smirked. My dad looked away. And my mom, she told me to stay home for everyone's sake. I didn't argue. I didn't even ask why. But the very next morning, my brother-in-law, who said I didn't belong, walked into my office to beg for money and found me sitting in the chairman's seat. He turned ghost white. My sister stopped breathing. And my mother, the woman who always looked right through me, finally saw me for who I really am. But what if I told you? That was just the beginning. Before we dive in, tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it where you are? Drop it in the comments. I want to know who's out there hearing this. I left the conference room a little after 7. The winter sky outside my windows already sunk in that deep blue shade Chicago gets before a storm. Most of the staff had gone home, but a soft glow still came from a few offices down the hall. I gathered my notes, slipped them into my bag, and paused when I noticed the small red ornament sitting on my desk. I'd brought it from home that morning, planning to stop by my parents' house sometime this week. It was the ornament I made in 2nd grade, lopsided and painted with streaks of gold that had faded over the years. My mother used to hang it front and center before she started saying her tree needed to look more grown up. I held it gently, turning it between my fingers. The quiet in my office felt comfortable, like a space I'd carved out through steady work and long nights. People respected me here. They counted on me. Out there, in my family, I was the one they'd rather not mention. Still, I had planned to bring this little ornament to my mother, hoping she'd smile at the memory of when life felt simpler. The hallway lights clicked into their nighttime setting as I reached for my coat. My phone buzzed. I expected it to be a question from one of the younger analysts, probably needing clarity on a budget figure. Instead, 3 notifications stacked across the screen. Mom, Dad, Celeste. I opened Mom's message first. Don't come to Christmas dinner. You embarrass this family. For a second, I thought I misread it. Maybe she texted the wrong person or meant something else. But the words stayed sharp, cold, deliberate. My stomach tightened, but my face stayed calm. Years of practice. Years of being told not to make a scene. Dad's message came right after. Your brother-in-law doesn't want discomfort at the table. He thinks you'll ruin the vibe. Better you stay home. Then Celeste, always ready to twist the knife with that practiced sweetness she saved for outsiders. Yeah, don't come ruin our moment. I stood there, phone in hand, the hum of the building low around me. No yelling, no tears. Just a thick silence inside my chest. This wasn't new, not really. They'd been nudging me out of things for years. Holidays, birthdays, decisions about the house. But this was the first time they said it plainly. Stay home. You embarrass us. Footsteps echoed from the elevator. 2 analysts headed out, chatting quietly, waving at me on their way. I nodded back, giving them a small smile, hiding the hit I'd just taken. I slipped the phone into my coat pocket and sat down again for a moment, resting the ornament on my desk. I remembered my mother saying last year, while adjusting the tree, we don't need extra ornaments, especially the old ones. That one sentence had stung more than I admitted, but I let it go like I let most things go. I breathed out slowly, trying to steady the mix of hurt and something else rising beneath it. Not anger, not yet. More like a reminder that I'd lived through this pattern all my life. Being the youngest meant doing everything right without being seen. Being dependable without being acknowledged. Keeping peace no one thanked me for. I brushed my thumb over the edge of the ornament. I could reply, ask why, push back. But the truth was, I didn't need their explanation. They'd told me enough times in other ways. They wanted their picture-perfect version of a holiday, and I didn't fit the frame. When they push me out, I get quieter, I murmured to myself. It wasn't resignation, it was clarity. A simple truth I'd learned to live with. I gathered my things again and walked out into the main hallway. The security team at the lobby waved as I entered the ground floor. One of them, Marcus, held the door for me. "Night, Ms. Vargas. Get home safe." "Thank you, Marcus," I said, steady, composed. Outside, the cold settled on my face, crisp and familiar. Snow lined the sidewalks of Evanston, and the streetlights gave everything a muted glow. I took my time walking to my car, letting the air clear my thoughts. There was work waiting for me tomorrow, an investment proposal that needed my final review before the board meeting. I had planned to meet with several partners, including a local group Celeste's husband kept trying to mention at family gatherings. He'd been circling around the idea of asking me for a favor, but I never encouraged it. Now, thinking of the messages, I felt something settle deeper inside me. A shift, not dramatic, not loud, just a quiet decision forming. By the time I reached my car, I knew I wouldn't respond to them tonight. I drove back to the office instead of heading straight home. Sometimes being in that space helped me think clearer, and I needed clarity more than comfort. Inside my suite, everything was still. I walked to my desk, opened the middle drawer, and placed the red ornament inside. It lay there softly, carrying years of memories no one in my family seemed to want anymore. "They don't want me there, not this year," I said under my breath. But my voice didn't shake, not even a little. I turned off the lights, locked the door behind me, and stepped into the hallway again, calm on the outside, something awakening underneath. But I didn't expect what the next morning would bring. I got to the office earlier than usual the next morning, hoping the quiet would help me clear my thoughts. The city still wore its winter hush, streets brushed with frost, coffee carts barely setting up. Inside, everything smelled like freshly brewed espresso and polished floors. I settled into my chair, opened the investment report I'd left out the night before, and tried to focus on numbers. But my head wasn't in it, not fully. Even though I hadn't replied to those messages, they'd taken up space. My family had made their position clear. I was a liability to their perfect little holiday, and apparently, the brother-in-law who barely looked me in the eye was the reason. I hadn't even told anyone. I didn't need the pity. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Ms. Vargas, my assistant Jordan, stood in the doorway, holding his tablet awkwardly. "There's someone asking for you. He didn't have an appointment." I frowned, glanced at the clock, barely 8:15. "Who is it?" "He said he's your brother-in-law, Jarek." I didn't move, didn't blink. The name hit like a low note on a piano. Unexpected, wrong. Of all people, I didn't think he'd show up here, not after what happened last night. "Send him in," I said finally, sitting a little straighter. Jordan looked unsure. "You want me to stay?" "No, but keep your eyes open." Seconds later, the door opened before I could stand. Jarek stepped inside, awkward and underdressed in a wrinkled navy coat and scuffed shoes. He looked out of place in every way, nervous energy wrapped in fake casual charm. His eyes swept the room, then paused at the logo behind my desk. I saw it then, the flicker of recognition that he had underestimated me. "Well, I gotta say," he started with a half smile, "didn't realize you worked at this level." I stayed seated. "You didn't come here to talk about office design, did you?" He gave a breathy chuckle and shoved his hands into his coat pockets. "You know, I always thought Celeste exaggerated when she said you were cold. But I guess this is just how you operate. Professional. Direct." I didn't respond. Let him talk. "Look," he went on, pacing a few steps before stopping again. "I know things got weird last night. Celeste told me you were probably hurt, but that's not what this is about." "Go on," I said calmly. He gave me a look like I was supposed to soften. When I didn't, he sighed. "I've been exploring a few opportunities." he said carefully. Startups, tech adjacent. Markets shifting, and I thought, who better to get some guidance from than family? We could turn this into something, a real partnership. There it was. Not even 5 minutes in. And by guidance, you mean investment? I asked, voice level. His smile wavered. Well, yeah, not handouts. Just someone to back it with credibility. And maybe a little capital to get us through phase 1. I didn't answer right away. My mind was already back to that text from my mother, the line about how I embarrassed the family. And now this man, who I'd barely spoken to outside of holidays, was standing in my office asking for money. The same man they chose over me last night. I don't mix family with business, I said evenly. He blinked. Excuse me? You came here for support, I clarified, and I'm telling you, this isn't the place for it. He scoffed. You serious right now? I am. Celeste said you'd be like this, said you'd act like you were better than the rest of us. I kept my tone neutral. That's not what I said. I said no. His jaw clenched. You owe her, She stuck up for you, told people you weren't as cold as you seem. I almost laughed, not from humor, but from the sheer audacity. She told people? Which people? He didn't answer. Instead, he took another lap around my office like he was trying to gather himself. He looked more frantic now, the polished charm peeling away. I just need to clear a few things, he muttered. It's not a big ask. It's temporary. That word, clear. It landed in my chest like a weight. He wasn't starting something new. He was drowning in something old, probably debt, probably lies he hadn't told Celeste or my parents. I sat back in my chair, watching him closely. You should talk to Celeste, I said, voice cool. He laughed bitterly. You think I didn't try that already? She doesn't understand how these things work. She thinks business is just brunch meetings and branding. That's not my problem, I replied. He stopped pacing. For the first time, I saw something raw pass through his eyes. Frustration, yes, but also fear. And then he said it. You think you're something special, don't you? Your own family doesn't even want you at Christmas. Maybe that's because they finally see you for what you are. The words hit their target, but not the way he expected. They didn't make me flinch. They made me focus. And for the first time, I felt something click into place. This wasn't about business. This was about entitlement. He thought because I kept my distance, I'd keep playing quiet. I didn't stand, didn't raise my voice. I simply said, if you're done, I have work to do. Outside the glass walls, I noticed Jordan glance over, then look away quickly. A couple of junior staffers nearby tried to seem busy but couldn't help glancing in. Jarek followed my gaze and shifted uncomfortably. The audience didn't help his cause. He walked to the door, hand on the handle, then turned, half over his shoulder. You'll regret this. Everyone in your family will. And with that, he was gone. I didn't answer him then, but something in me had already shifted. I sat there for a long while after the door shut. The silence filled every corner of the room, heavy like fog. I didn't touch the papers on my desk, didn't glance at the computer. My eyes stayed locked on the glass where Jarek's breath had briefly fogged it. He was gone, but his words lingered. Your own family doesn't even want you. He didn't say anything new. That was the part that made it worse. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. That line had been following me my entire life, shifting shape, changing tones, wearing different faces. Sometimes it came dressed in polite silence, like when they made plans without telling me. Sometimes it wore a smile, like when Celeste said, "Oh, Delphine's just busy with work," as if that explained everything away. And sometimes, like today, it came out sharp, loud, and meant to hurt. I pressed my palms against my eyes, But what I really wanted was to press pause on the memory that was coming back without asking permission. It wasn't one moment. It was a thread of them, wrapped around years, winding tighter with each Christmas. There was always a reason I didn't quite belong at the table. One year, I remember bringing over a gift basket for the family. I'd spent a whole week picking everything out: artisan crackers, imported cheese, a handwritten note I'd carefully rewritten 3 times. I'd placed it on the kitchen counter, and within seconds, Celeste laughed and said, "You know Mom's gluten-free now, right?" Like I'd broken some unspoken rule. But the first real fracture? That was when I was 13. I had saved up allowance and babysitting money to buy a red dress I saw in the church thrift store window. It had tiny glass beads stitched into the neckline and a matching velvet ribbon around the waist. I'd imagined it, how I'd wear it to our family's Christmas dinner, how I'd walk downstairs and they'd say, "Wow, Delphine, you look so grown up." Instead, I came home from school, dress laid out on my bed, only to find the house empty. At first, I thought they were running errands. But hours passed. I called every phone in the house. I sat on the steps in that dress until the outside lights flicked on automatically. They walked in after midnight, laughing, carrying takeout leftovers in plastic bags. My mom said, "Oh, honey, it was last minute. Your dad's clients invited us out." "You would have been bored anyway," my dad added, already walking toward the den. Celeste barely looked at me. She was too busy texting. I hadn't eaten dinner. I just waited. That night, I took off the dress and folded it carefully. Never wore it again. Back in my office now, I could still feel that velvet ribbon against my waist. Still remember how it felt, sitting on those cold steps in silence. Not dramatic, not angry, just small. And now I was hearing the same message again, just dressed in new words. "Don't come. You embarrass us. You'll ruin our moment." Some people grow out of family roles. Mine just calcified with time. I thought of Celeste next. It was impossible not to. She had always been the star, the golden one. She danced in high school, went to parties, had boyfriends our parents adored. She didn't just shine, she knew how to reflect every bit of attention back on herself, even when it wasn't hers to begin with. When I got a scholarship in college, she told my parents I was barely holding it together, that I was too stressed, maybe not cut out for all that pressure. I didn't know she said that until years later, when my mom asked, "Are you sure you're not pushing yourself too hard? Celeste said you looked tired in your pictures." I'd been working 2 jobs and still made the dean's list, but that didn't make it into the dinner conversation, I guess. She didn't scream or sabotage. She whispered, twisted, smiled while slipping a wedge between me and everyone else. And they listened. I don't know when I started shrinking to fit the space they left me. Maybe it was when I stopped correcting them, when I stopped trying to prove my version of the story. Maybe I just got tired. There was another memory, one I hadn't touched in years. Christmas Eve. I was maybe 17. I had just gotten back from volunteering at the community center where we'd handed out winter coats. I was proud. I wanted to tell someone. I walked in and caught the tail end of a conversation between my father and Celeste. "She tries," my dad said, "but she doesn't fit our image." Celeste just nodded. Not a word of protest. Just quiet agreement. I never told them I heard. That sentence sat in me like a splinter, buried deep. It didn't bleed, but it never stopped aching. Now, sitting in my office, years later, with my name on the door, with a team that respected me and a business I'd built from the ground up, I still felt that old ache, that quiet questioning. Was I really never enough? Or was I just never allowed to be? I didn't cry, not out loud. I've taught myself not to. But something trembled beneath the surface, a small crack that had waited too long to be seen. Then came the knock. Jordan again, stepping in carefully like the room might still be charged. "Sorry to interrupt," he said gently. "Mail just came through. This was addressed directly to you. No return address. But it's your mother's handwriting." He placed the envelope on my desk and left without another word. I stared at it, plain white, thin. I didn't open it, not yet. I held that envelope for a long time, not knowing it would expose more than I expected. I didn't open the envelope right away. I took it home with me, resting it on the passenger seat like it was breakable. When I walked into my house, the quiet felt different, not peaceful, expectant. I set my bag down, hung my coat over the back of a chair, and stood in the kitchen for a moment, just listening to the refrigerator hum. Anything to delay the wait I knew was inside that thin piece of mail. Eventually, I carried the envelope to the dining table. I sat there, hands folded, staring at my mother's handwriting. It had always been neat, almost rigid, like every letter had a boundary it refused to cross. I traced the ink with my thumb, breathing slowly until the air settled around me. And then I tore it open. The paper slid out easily. A single sheet at first. I unfolded it, expecting something emotional, maybe a half-hearted attempt to soften the blow of yesterday's message. But it wasn't that. Not even close. The wording was clipped, cold, almost like a memo. "We are adjusting family boundaries. This year is not the right atmosphere for tension. Please respect our wishes." Respect our wishes. As if I was the one barging through a door uninvited. As if I was the disruption that needed to be controlled. I read the lines twice, then set the letter down, letting out a breath I didn't know I had been holding. Something felt off. The tone wasn't my mother's usual brand of passive disappointment. This felt instructed, filtered, manufactured. I reached back into the envelope, and my fingers brushed against something thicker. Another sheet. I pulled it out and froze. It was a printed bank transfer record. My name at the top, a reimbursement request from my parents, a loan they had supposedly repaid to my sister on my behalf. In the comments section were notes, typed, formal. "Delphine struggles with money management. She needs guidance before she harms her financial stability." I stared at those lines until the words blurred. I had never borrowed anything from Celeste, not $1, not even lunch money growing up. And I certainly had never asked my parents to repay something I never took. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a story someone wrote for me, about me. And they believed it. My chest tightened. Not from sadness this time, but from a slow, steady burn rising up like heat through floorboards. I set the record aside and reached for another folded page buried underneath. It was older, printed on yellowing paper, an old holiday dinner itinerary. My eyes skimmed down the guest list, names neatly typed in a column. Near the bottom, I saw mine, then saw the line drawn through it. A perfect, clean stroke. I remembered that year. I'd spent the entire day waiting for someone to call. I kept telling myself they must have been running late, or maybe the weather delayed things. I ordered takeout around 9 at night, sat in front of the TV, and tried to pretend the empty feeling in the house wasn't swallowing me whole. All that time, my name had already been crossed out. I leaned back in my chair, letting the memory wash through me, but it didn't drown me this time. It clarified something. They hadn't forgotten. They had chosen. I reached again into the envelope and felt a small folded slip. Barely an inch wide. My father's handwriting this time. Smaller, rushed. "She deserves better, but I don't know how to fix this." I blinked, reading it twice, 3 times. It didn't match the voice I usually heard from him. Not the cold lines, not the silence. This was something else, something uncertain, maybe even guilty. I placed the note beside the others and sat there, hands resting flat on the table. Papers spread out like pieces of a puzzle I had been trying to solve my whole life without knowing it existed. It wasn't just exclusion or distance or a difference in personalities. It was a pattern, a design. One person bending the truth, another enforcing it, and one standing by, too comfortable to challenge either side. And me, on the receiving end of stories that never belonged to me. I wasn't shaking anymore. I didn't feel small or lost. The sadness shifted into something heavier, sharper, almost grounding. My phone buzzed. A message from Celeste. "Hope you're staying out of the way tomorrow. Big day for us." Us. Of course. I stared at the screen, feeling everything inside me settle into a quiet, undeniable certainty. Something had changed, something I didn't plan, but welcomed. That message was the moment I stopped hurting and started preparing. But morning light has a way of peeling back layers you thought you'd buried. And when it slipped through the blinds the next day, soft and golden against the hardwood floor, I felt none of the clarity I had the night before. Just weight. That dull, settled heaviness. I had barely slept. My eyes felt swollen, though I hadn't cried. I lay there for hours, just breathing and thinking. Thinking too much, really? Until the light finally told me there was no hiding left to do. I got up, padded into the kitchen, started a pot of coffee out of habit, then left the mug untouched. I stood at the counter, arms crossed, watching the steam rise. My mind went back to all the Decembers before. The ones I spent wondering what I'd done wrong, assuming I'd missed a message or misread a plan. The times I'd explained away empty invitations and late replies with reasons that made me the problem. Now I knew better. And it hurt even more. By the time I pulled into the parking garage at the office, the sun was full. I took the elevator up in silence, nodding at the security guard, not stopping for small talk like I usually do. My heels clicked through the hallway like they were the only sound in the world. Inside my suite, the air felt too still. Usually the building energized me. Glass walls, crisp lines, everything exactly where I needed it. But today, it all felt too clean, too removed. I sat down behind my desk and just stared. At my calendar, at the blinking cursor on my screen, at the framed award on the bookshelf that no one in my family ever asked about. A soft knock came at the door. "Delphine," my assistant said gently. "You might want to see this." She walked in, holding out her phone. I took it from her, not ready for what I'd see. A selfie, Celeste and Jarek, grinning like teenagers. The caption, "Some people pretend to be businesswomen. We actually do the real work." And the comments, laughing, snide, familiar names, mutual friends from years ago, even a cousin. One replied, "Guess we know who the real success story is." Family goals. I blinked slowly, handed the phone back without a word, and closed my door. Then I slid down the back of it, not in a dramatic way, not with tears or gasps or fists clenched, just let myself sink. I sat on the floor, knees up, arms draped over them, forehead resting on my forearm. There's a kind of heartbreak that doesn't scream. It just empties you, quietly, completely. And I let it. I stayed like that for I don't know how long, until the cold from the floor made its way through my suit. I pulled myself up, returned to my desk, and sat again. But my hands didn't go to the keyboard. They went to memory. Back to the time I started my first business. Just me, a laptop, and a half-year's savings. I was proud, excited, and when I told Celeste, she laughed, said it was adorable, called it a passion project during Christmas dinner. My mother, in front of Tisar, everyone said, "At least it keeps you occupied." I kept going anyway, built it from scratch, sold it 3 years later. No one in my family even asked what I sold it for. My phone buzzed again. A text from my mother. "Your sister supported you for years. You just never appreciated it." My jaw clenched. Supported? What kind of support rewrites every fact of my life and turns my efforts into punchlines? I could see the pattern more clearly now. Celeste acted. My mother justified. My father stayed quiet, and I kept adjusting, shrinking, trying to be the good daughter. The one who didn't stir up trouble, the one who stayed polite, civil, reasonable. That role had a cost. It kept them comfortable, and it kept me erased. The office was emptying out when I finally started packing up. I drove home in silence. No music, no calls, just the sound of tires over pavement and the occasional crackle of salt under the wheels. I got inside, turned on a few lights, and set my bag down like it weighed 100 pounds. I was just about to change out of my clothes when my phone lit up again. A name I barely recognized. One of the junior analysts at the firm. I answered. "Hey, everything okay?" Her voice was nervous. "Sorry to bother you. I didn't know if I should say anything, but I heard something earlier, in the hallway." I waited. It was Celeste. She was on the phone. I think she didn't realize anyone was around. She said something like, "We've got everything lined up. Once this hits, no one will take Delphine seriously again." I sat down. She laughed after, said, "She always looks so put together, but let's see how long that lasts." I closed my eyes. "Thank you," I told her. "You did the right thing." We hung up. I didn't panic, didn't pace. I just sat at the dining table. Again, same chair, same spot. I pulled out the envelope from the night before, spread the papers across the surface, the fake loan, the crossed-out guest list, my father's note, and I whispered to no one in particular. They want me invisible. They think I'll stay quiet forever. And maybe I had. For too long. But this silence, this one wasn't weakness. It was clarity. And clarity, I realized, can be far more dangerous than anger. That truth stayed with me long after the house went quiet. I remember sitting there, documents spread across my dining table, letting that steady sense of purpose settle into my chest. No shaking, no tears. Just a clear, centered awareness that something in me had shifted for good. By the time morning came, I wasn't fully rested, but my mind was sharper, focused. I got dressed with a kind of calm I hadn't felt in days, grabbed my bag, and drove to the office before the building really woke up. The sky was still a muted blue, the city not yet loud. It was the kind of quiet that feels like a clean page. Inside my suite, I switched on the lights and breathed in the familiar scent of polished wood and paper. I set my things down carefully and pulled the documents from yesterday out of my bag. The forged loan, the crossed-out guest list, my father's conflicted note. I lined them up neatly across my desk. Not to brood, to prepare. I was sorting through them, grouping what needed verification and what needed legal steps, when a knock interrupted me. Not the usual polite tap from my assistant, but a faster, uneasy rhythm. My secretary peeked in. "There's someone here to see you." I raised an eyebrow. "Who?" She hesitated. "Your brother-in-law." My stomach didn't drop, not this time, but there was a tightening behind my ribs as I pushed my chair back and stood. "Send him in." She nodded and stepped aside, and Jarek walked in like a man trying very hard to look confident. The problem was, his eyes kept darting around, over the conference table, the framed awards, the company crest on the far wall. He tried to hide the nerves, but they clung to him like an aura. "Wow," he said, letting out a little laugh. "Didn't realize you were operating at this level." I didn't respond, just watched him. Quietly. He shifted. "Anyway, I figured we should talk. Family to family." That phrase already told me what direction this was going. "So," he continued, hands rubbing together, "I've got this business deal on the table, but I need a quick investment to close it. Nothing huge, just enough to get things moving." Then, as if he were doing me a favor, he added, "Celeste said you'd be glad to help. said you're doing well enough to share some of that success. There it was, the entitlement that had been rotting at the core of my family for so long. I stayed silent, watching. People get nervous when you don't fill the space for them. And it showed. His voice got quicker, his explanations sloppier. I mean, come on, Delphine. We're family. And you owe us, you know? After all the times we covered for you. Covered for me. That lie again. I leaned back slightly, folding my arms. Covered for me? How? He waved a hand, dismissive. All the things we've smoothed over. The way your folks always had to explain your situation. My situation? Yeah, your lack of presence. He smirked like he thought he was clever. Everyone knows you keep to yourself. That's why we sometimes used your name on paperwork. People trust you. It's not a big deal. I froze, not outwardly. Inside. You used my name, I repeated slowly. On paperwork. He shrugged. It made us look credible. Relax. It's fine. You never complain about anything anyway. That's when I stood. I didn't slam my hands on the desk. I didn't raise my voice. I just placed both palms flat on the surface and rose with the steadiness of someone done apologizing for breathing. Jarek, I said softly, you used my name without permission. You know that's illegal. His eyebrows shot up. You're overreacting. I reached into my drawer and pulled out a folder, one I had prepared weeks ago for an unrelated audit, but it contained what I needed: corporate signature logs, authentication records, authorization lists, proof of who had legal access, proof that he wasn't on it. I set it on the desk between us. Let me be clear, I said, meeting his eyes. You will never use my name again, not verbally, not on paper, not to impress anyone. You will not attach me to your business, your debts, or your lies. His lips parted, but no words came out. I stepped closer. If you ever try, even once more, I won't warn you next time. The silence between us thickened. His confidence cracked, then crumbled. Color drained from his face as he looked down at the folder, at the reality he had underestimated. You're making a mistake, he muttered weakly. No, I answered, calm as stone. I'm correcting one. For several seconds, he just stood there, frozen, the same way he had frozen yesterday when he realized who I was in the boardroom. It was the look of a man who suddenly understood that the version of me he depended on no longer existed. He finally backed up, bumping into the chair behind him. Celeste isn't going to like this. I'm aware. He didn't know what to do with that answer, so he just left, shoulders tense, steps uneven, like someone retreating from a place they never should have entered. And as the door clicked shut, I exhaled slowly. He left my office shaken, but I knew Celeste wouldn't take his panic lightly. That woman never let anything slip through her fingers without tightening her grip somewhere else. I stayed at my desk for a while after Jarek left, jotting down a few notes while the tension still hovered in the room like leftover perfume, bitter and clinging. I reviewed every detail of our conversation, his tone, his language, his assumptions. The documents I showed him were still neatly laid out beside my laptop, like puzzle pieces waiting for the final frame. I could almost feel it building, Celeste's next move. If she was going to retaliate, it would be swift, public, and dressed in fake virtue. And I was right. My phone started buzzing around lunchtime, one message, then another, then a dozen more. You okay? What's going on? Did you see what your sister posted? I clicked open my social media app. The first thing I saw was a photo of me. Old, blurry, taken at a family cookout years ago. I was mid-blink, mid-laugh, mid-nothing. Unflattering and careless. The caption read, "Some people hide their pain behind success. Let's remember to show compassion Even when it's hard to understand their behavior, pray for your loved ones. Underneath, our family, martyr first. Ross mental health matters thousands of views, hundreds of comments, most from strangers, all pitying. I sat back in my chair, the weight of it settling in like cold water seeping through clothes. She didn't accuse me, she didn't name me, but she didn't have to. Everyone knew who the post was about. It was the kind of performance that left room for denial, but aimed to kill with suggestion. And then the comments started filling in the blanks. She always seemed off. Didn't know she was struggling that badly. Success doesn't mean happiness. Praying for her. I stared at the screen, breath caught somewhere in my chest. This wasn't just petty. This was calculated. She wasn't trying to hurt my feelings. She was trying to discredit me. I stood slowly, walked over to the window, trying to will the feeling away. But the worst of it hadn't hit yet. My phone buzzed again. It was a comment, under Celeste's post, from my mother. "We've tried to help Delphine for years. Please keep our family in your prayers." My knees weakened slightly. I had to sit back down. It was one thing for Celeste to launch her attacks in sly, manipulative ways. But to see my mother, Marlene, add to it, echo it, sanctify it, it broke something. I sat there with the phone in my hand, unable to respond, unable to breathe deeply. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a disagreement. This was a coordinated story being told without me, about me. A story where I was the unstable one, the difficult one, the liability. And I realized something chilling. They weren't just trying to shame me. They were painting me as unwell. That label, in the wrong hands, could strip away credibility. Cost me clients, cost me everything I'd built. I needed air. I grabbed my coat and keys and walked out to the parking lot. The December sun hung low, filtered through the haze of a gray afternoon. I slid into the driver's seat, shut the door, and sat still. For a long time. Tears threatened, but I didn't let them fall, not yet. My phone rang again, unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in me said, answer it. "Hello? Delphine?" The voice was familiar, tired. "Dad?" A pause. "Don't say anything, just listen," he said, his voice lower than I'd ever heard it. "Your mother and sister, they're planning something bigger than that post. I overheard them this morning. Be careful, please." "Wait, what are you talking about? Why, I shouldn't be calling. I can't pretend anymore." His voice cracked. "I've known for a long time, but I didn't know how to stop it." The line went dead before I could ask anything else. I stared at the screen in my hand. The silence in my car grew louder than any conversation. My father, who had stayed on the sidelines for decades, just confirmed the very thing I'd feared since I was a teenager. They didn't just see me as a problem. They built their identity around keeping me small. After a moment, I started the engine, pulled out of the lot, and headed home. The drive was a blur, past the same shops, the same traffic lights, but none of it registered. I was operating on instinct, survival mode. Back home, I didn't turn on the lights. I moved through the house in the soft blue of late afternoon, took off my coat, and laid everything back out on the table, the same table where I'd first sat with the envelope from my mother. I looked at every page again, slowly, with new eyes. The forged reimbursement note, the old guest list, the bank statements, the slander on social media. It wasn't paranoia, it was a pattern, and patterns, once visible, could be broken. I whispered more to myself than anyone else. If they're escalating, so will I. Not with vengeance, not with the same weapons, with truth. I gathered the documents and placed them neatly into a secure leather bag. Not to react, not to attack, but to prepare. Because now I knew This wasn't about family. This was about control. And I had finally stepped out of the role they needed me to play. I didn't know it yet, but the next escalation would force a final showdown I couldn't avoid. And when it came, it didn't knock. It was waiting for me on my desk, already opened in someone else's hands before I ever saw it. The next morning, I arrived at work earlier than usual. There was a stillness in the air, too quiet, too deliberate. The front receptionist nodded at me, her eyes hesitant. I nodded back, pretending not to notice the shift in temperature. I already felt it in my chest. Something had moved. Something had been set in motion. When I unlocked my office and turned on the light, the envelope was sitting there, white, stiff, and official. My name printed neatly on the front. No return address. I knew before opening it. Inside, a summons from Human Resources. The letter was blunt, cold. You are required to attend a mandatory meeting regarding a formal complaint filed against you. Allegations include professional misconduct, verbal aggression, and fostering a hostile work environment. At the bottom, Jarek's name, and a timestamp, filed yesterday. I let the paper fall back onto the desk. My first reaction wasn't shock. It was something heavier. Not surprise, not even anger, just confirmation. They weren't done with me, not yet. I sat down, the envelope still open beside me. A deep exhale came without asking. So this was the angle. If they couldn't silence me, they'd discredit me. They'd paint me as volatile, dangerous, unprofessional. They weren't attacking my name. They were coming for my foundation. And Jarek? That man couldn't spell misconduct without spell check. Which meant one thing, Celeste helped him. She probably typed it herself. I was escorted to a neutral conference room just before noon. The HR manager, new, fresh-faced, uncomfortable, greeted me with a practiced smile and a clipboard. Everything about the setup was impersonal, sterile, like they were afraid I might snap if given too much humanity. They asked questions. I answered clearly. There was nothing to hide, and I made sure not to sound defensive. But under every calm word, I felt something building. Not panic, something colder, heavier, a kind of grief, not for myself. For all the years I spent trusting a version of my family that never existed. I glanced across the table at the stack of documents they'd printed to support the inquiry. Midway through, a page caught my eye. Unrelated, it seemed, but I recognized the number. A transaction tied to Jarek's proposal. Only, the signature wasn't mine. It was Celeste's. Bold, clean, confident. No attempt to disguise it. My pulse slowed, my breath evened out. That's when the tide shifted, not in the room, but inside me. I leaned forward slightly. Can I request a copy of that page? I asked, as calmly as if I were requesting a refill on water. The HR manager blinked, unsure. Of course, she said after a moment. I nodded, already knowing what I'd find. 10 minutes later, I was back in my office with the documents spread out across my desk. Every line, every transfer, every note led to the same conclusion. Celeste had been funneling money through Jarek's business, using my name, my corporate identity, my position. They didn't just want to erase me, they wanted to be me, use me as a shield. And the false complaint? That was just the distraction while they buried the trail. Suddenly, Christmas made sense. The silence, the exclusions, the faux concerned texts. It was never about me not fitting in. They were keeping me away, so I wouldn't see what they were doing. This wasn't personal. It was strategic. And that was the final break I needed. I requested an emergency meeting with legal and executive counsel. They moved quickly, too many red flags in one morning. I brought every document I had, and I didn't waste a single word. I laid it all out in order. Jarek's fraudulent filing, Celeste's financial trail, the misuse of my credentials. The head of legal flipped through the pages in silence, his brow tightening with each turn. "This is serious," he said quietly. His tone had changed. So had the air in the room. I didn't nod. I didn't flinch. I just looked him in the eye and replied, "Yes, it is." 10 minutes later, I walked into the lobby. Celeste and Marlene were already waiting, summoned for what HR called a follow-up. Celeste had her arms folded, her nails painted something glossy and aggressive. She wore the same smirk she always wore when she thought she'd won before the game had even started. Marlene stood beside her, calm and rehearsed, as if this was just another routine appointment. They looked at me like I was still the little girl who used to cry when she wasn't invited to the table. They didn't know what I was holding behind the folder. I stepped forward. "Jarek filed a false complaint," I said softly. "But you already knew that." Celeste's smile faltered. Slightly. I placed the documents down, page after page, on the front counter, each one highlighting the fraud, each one carrying her name, her signature, her trail. HR representatives stepped forward. Legal joined them. Voices dropped into whispers. Phones came out. Eyes widened. Celeste reached for the papers. "This isn't," she began. "It is," I cut in. "And you knew what you were doing every step of the way." Her head snapped toward Marlene, who now stood frozen. For the first time, she looked unsure, like something had shifted too far to recover. "You said it wouldn't come back to me," Celeste hissed. "Stop talking," Marlene muttered, gripping her daughter's arm tightly. But it was too late. The room heard everything. The damage wasn't just done, it was exposed. Celeste was ushered into a private conference room for questioning. Her steps lacked the usual power. Marlene lingered behind, looking at me like I was a stranger. Her voice was soft, almost trembling. "Why are you doing this?" I looked at her for a long moment. She looked smaller now. Older. "I didn't start this," I said quietly. "I'm just ending what you refused to see." She didn't answer, and as they took Celeste away, something I never expected happened. My father stepped forward. He looked smaller than I remembered, not in height, not in weight, just smaller in presence. The man who always stayed in the background, who nodded more than he spoke, now stood with his hands tucked deep into the pockets of his coat, like he was bracing for winter inside the lobby, not outside. "Delphine," he said, barely above a whisper. I turned fully toward him, unsure what I'd hear next. He didn't meet my eyes right away. He stared past me, like he was still searching for the right script, except this time there wasn't one. "I should have said something a long time ago," he began, his voice cracking under its own weight. "I saw the way they treated you. I saw it for years, and I told myself it'd sort itself out." He cleared his throat, tried again. "I thought keeping quiet would keep peace, but I see now silence has its own kind of violence." For a moment, I didn't say anything. Not because I didn't have words, but because I wanted his to land without being cushioned. I wasn't going to rescue him from the discomfort. He needed to stand in it, just like I had for decades. "I'm not doing this to hurt them," I finally said, steady but not sharp. "I'm doing this because I deserve better than being their shield." His eyes closed slowly, like the truth stung more than he thought it would. "I know," he said. "I know now." We stood there quietly, no dramatic embrace, no tears, no sweeping apology. Just a man realizing too late that neutrality had a cost, and a daughter who finally stopped paying it. Behind him, I saw my mother approaching. Marlene's steps weren't quick, and her expression didn't carry that usual polished detachment. Her shoulders curved slightly inward, like the scaffolding holding her up had finally cracked. "I thought protecting family meant defending the strongest voice in the room," she said softly, her hands wringing one another. "But maybe it meant standing up for the quietest." I studied her face. I expected resistance, defensiveness. But what I saw was something else. Age. Regret. A woman realizing that silence had worn her down too, in ways she never spoke about. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't try to undo what was done. And maybe that was the first honest thing she'd done in a long time. Through the glass wall of the conference room, I could see Celeste, alone. Her arms waved as she argued, her mascara slightly smeared, her voice clearly raised though I couldn't hear the words. Her panic was visible, her power evaporating with every minute that passed. I watched for only a few seconds. Then I looked away. I wasn't here to enjoy her unraveling. I wasn't here for revenge. I just wanted peace. And peace doesn't demand a front row seat to someone else's collapse. A few minutes later, Jarek was escorted out of the building by security. He glanced my way, sharp, bitter, eyes full of resentment. But I didn't give him anything back. His exit wasn't a victory. It was just overdue. I turned toward the exit. That's when I saw it. On the holiday donation table in the center of the lobby, nestled between an untouched basket of canned goods and a faded poinsettia, sat a small silver bell, identical to the one my mother used to place on the Christmas table every year. The bell no one touched until she gave permission. The bell I was never asked to ring. It had always meant family unity. But back then, it felt more like a test. I walked to it slowly, reached out, and picked it up. It was light in my palm, harmless, not sacred, just a piece of metal shaped like memory. I held it for a second, then gently set it back down. I didn't need to take it with me. I'd already let it go. Outside, the December air hit my face like a reset. Crisp, cold, clear. I pulled out my phone and called May. She answered on the first ring. "You on your way?" "I'm coming," I said. "Don't throw out that plate." "I wouldn't dare," she laughed, "but I might have snuck a bite or two." Her voice, so familiar, so warm, sounded like the exact thing I hadn't even realized I'd been needing. Family, as it should be, chosen, rooted in kindness, not obligation. I drove home slowly, no rush, just breathing. Once inside, I lit a small candle on my side table, not for Christmas, not for nostalgia, just for presence. The silence in my house didn't feel empty tonight. It felt earned. I didn't have everything I thought I wanted, but I had myself, whole, unbent, and no longer waiting for someone to hand me permission to exist. I sat down, folded my hands in my lap, and whispered the words I should have believed long ago. I deserved better than silence. And this time, I believed every word. And maybe next Christmas, I won't be waiting for an invitation that was never meant for me.